Hey there. Welcome back. We're about to take a really deep dive into some pretty wild concepts. You sent over some fascinating stuff, including that interview with Deepak Chopra, and it's got us thinking about the very nature of reality, what consciousness really is, even down to the fundamental building blocks of the universe. Like what is it all made of?
Yeah, it's like you sent us on this quest to unpack these pretty heavy ideas. We're talking about the composition of the universe, and then we're diving into things like extrasensory perception and even the emergence of like a new human species. So yeah, lots to cover. And it's pulling from physics, the study of consciousness, ancient wisdom, and all thanks to you. Thanks to the material you shared with us.
Right. And really at the center of it all is that MB Explorers podcast you shared, where Alec and Jonathan Cohen, they had this incredibly far-reaching conversation with Deepak Chopra. It seemed like they covered everything, like the deepest mysteries of the universe, the potential impact of AI, and even like the untapped abilities that we humans might have. So where do we even begin? Like, how do we even start to unpack all of this?
Well, maybe we start with a question that seems like it should have a simple answer, something really foundational. But it turns out it's one of the biggest open questions in science, like what is the universe actually made of?
Right. You would think we would have that figured out by now.
Hmm.
Atoms, the periodic table, all that stuff we learned in school. But get this, the ordinary matter, the stuff that makes up you and me, the stars, everything we see and touch, that only counts for a tiny, tiny fraction of the observable universe. We're talking 0.1%.
And then, what about the other 99.9%? Well, about 70% of that is something we call dark energy. Imagine this. You throw a ball up in the air, right? You expect it to slow down. But instead, it starts accelerating upwards, faster and faster. That's kind of what dark energy is like. It's this mysterious force that's causing the universe to not just expand, but to expand at an accelerating rate.
And then there's this other thing called dark matter, makes up another 27% or so. And it's completely invisible. It doesn't interact with light or any kind of electromagnetic radiation. Like we can't even see it. We only know it's there because of its gravitational pull. Without dark matter, galaxies wouldn't have enough mass to hold themselves together. So scientists are really trying to figure out what this dark matter is. There's even this hypothetical particle called a WIMP, but, we still haven't found it.
So think about this. Everything we can actually observe, everything we can see and touch, that's only a tiny sliver of what's really out there. And even that tiny bit, that 0.1% made of atoms, well, even that behaves in really strange ways at the quantum level.
Oh, you mean that whole particle wave duality thing? Yeah, it's totally mind-bending.
Yeah.
So like at the smallest scales, things like electrons, sometimes they act like particles, like little tiny balls of matter. But then other times they act like waves, like they're spread out and don't have a specific location. And these waves are basically mathematical descriptions of probabilities. It's like, what's really going on down there? Like, what is the universe even made of?
Well, according to the interview, the best answer we have right now is we don't really know. It could even be potentially like nothing. At least not nothing as we currently understand it.
Which then leads to this other huge question, like the second big open question in science. And philosophers have been wrestling with this one for, I don't know, thousands of years. It's that whole hard problem of consciousness.
Right.
If the universe is mostly this mysterious nothing, then why does it feel so real to us? How do we experience things? Like, where do our feelings and thoughts come from?
It is a very fundamental puzzle, right? I mean, how do we go from this universe that's mostly dark energy and dark matter to this rich inner world that we all experience? And like you said, this is not a new conversation. As they talked about in the interview, Plato was grappling with this whole mind-body problem way back when. I mean, he even suggested that maybe the universe is ultimately made of ideas.
Right, so it's not just about matter. And that idea that the universe as we see it might be kind of an illusion, that resonates with a lot of wisdom traditions too.
Yeah.
Like Eastern philosophies, the Kabbalah, Sufi mysticism. They often talk about the universe as being this kind of emanation or appearance of a cosmic consciousness. And some modern thinkers, they even propose that we could be living in some kind of a simulation, a complex digital world outside of our familiar space and time that's constantly generating our reality, using information, like through an endless stream of ones and zeros.
It's a pretty wild concept to try to wrap your head around, right? It's like everything we encounter, from the ground beneath our feet to, I don't know, distant galaxies, it could all just be different arrangements of information. So if we're in this, like, cosmic dream or simulation, what does that even mean for our own consciousness?
Right, right.
Well, the interview suggests that consciousness is not just another form of computation. It's fundamentally different. They describe it as non-computable, meaning it can't be replicated or fully understood through algorithms. It's also described as borderless, infinite, spaceless, timeless. It's like ultimately beyond our comprehension. Freeman Dyson even said something like, God is what the mind becomes when it has passed beyond the scale of our comprehension. So the suggestion here is that this consciousness is what allows for all computation, but it's not a product of computation itself.
That's a pretty big shift in perspective. And waking up in this context, it's not about your morning alarm, right? It's about shifting our awareness from this perceived projection, this everyday reality that seems so solid, to the source of that projection, to this underlying cosmic consciousness. Wittgenstein even had this similar idea, where he compared our life to a dream. And he said we occasionally awaken to a deeper reality.
And there's this really important aspect of this dream we're talking about, our beliefs. The interview says we only see things that we believe in, not the other way around. Think about that, like our childhood conditioning. Everything from our economic background, ethnicity, to our emotional upbringing, religion, and even our spiritual environment. All of this shapes how we perceive the world. It forms our belief system.
And they give this really powerful example with that kitten experiment. So they raised kittens in an environment where they only saw horizontal stripes. And those kittens, they grew up unable to perceive vertical lines, and vice versa. It's like their brains literally didn't develop the neural connections to process what they hadn't experienced. It's crazy, right? Like our experiences actually wire our perception.
Yeah, exactly. So what we think of as matter, as this tangible stuff, might not actually be the fundamental reality. It's more like a perceptual activity, a way that our consciousness interprets experience. Think about it. You have a sensation or you hear a sound. Where does that happen? Not inside your brain as some miniature image or sound wave, but seemingly outside of space-time, in consciousness itself, and even the brain itself. From this point of view, it's just another experience within that field of consciousness.
Wow. Okay, so if our perception shapes our reality so much, and if consciousness is this fundamental, non-local thing, what does that mean for us, for our own evolution?
Yeah.
And the potential we have as humans?
Well, the interview suggests that humanity is at a crucial point in its evolutionary journey. With AI, artificial intelligence, advancing so rapidly, there are risks, of course, but there's also the potential for amazing change, for us to transform into something new.
And that actually leads to a pretty radical prediction. They talked about the emergence of a new human species, which they called metahumans. And they think this could happen within, like, the next 20 years. It's the idea that these large language models, which, everyone's using now, they're subtly changing our brains. And when you combine that with epigenetic modulation, that's where your environment influences your genes. Without actually changing your DNA, it could lead to significant evolution. They even suggested that, like, as we're listening right now, our frontal cortexes are potentially changing in real time.
Now, this is all pretty challenging for people who have a strictly materialist worldview, people who only believe what they can see and measure. But the interview emphasizes that there are real things out there that we can't easily measure. Like some people say they can see auras. Or take Thomas Campbell, for example. He had these out-of-body experiences after doing transcendental meditation.
And that brings us to extrasensory perception, ESP, and non-local potential. The interview explored the possibility that these are latent abilities, things like ESP and remote viewing. That might become more common in this new kind of human. They even shared that story about the telepathy tapes.
Oh, yeah, that story about the young boy from New Jersey. His mom was convinced he could read her mind. So researchers set up this experiment, put the mother in one room. She was reading a book silently. And then the boy, he was in another room, typing on a computer. And get this, he was typing out exactly what she was reading.
It's incredible, right? And when they asked him how he did it, he just said, "I love my mother so much." And that led to this fascinating idea. What if love is actually a form of non-local correlation or entanglement between their consciousness? It would be similar to the quantum entanglement they've observed with particles. And the interview even highlighted that the Nobel Prize was given for research into quantum entanglement.
And building on that, they presented this perspective, that love isn't just an emotion, but maybe a fundamental force that connects everything. Maybe it's even like the ultimate truth, as the poet Rumi suggested, a state of oneness, where the boundaries between you and me, or between us and the universe, dissolve. And this concept of love, it extends to healing too.
They mentioned the general theory of love from neuroscience, which talks about things like limbic resonance, where our emotional states can sync up with the people around us. And limbic regulation, where one person's calm energy can actually help to regulate another person's emotions. And even limbic revision, which means that deep love connections can actually rewire our emotional brain circuitry.
Yeah. It really aligns with ideas about energy healing, where intention and connection really matter.
Absolutely. So what some people call psychic abilities, the interview reframes them as these non-local dormant human potentials, or as these manifestations of non-local correlation or entanglement. In the Yoga Sutras, they even describe all these extraordinary abilities that can come from deep meditative states,
Yes.
suggesting that consciousness is this field of infinite possibilities.
And this kind of all circles back to intuition and creativity, right? Like true intuition. It's presented as more than just a hunch. It's a form of knowing that goes beyond logic, a holistic understanding that might even tap into what some call the mind of God, and radical creativity, the kind that really pushes boundaries. It's described as disruptive and non-algorithmic, so it's different from even what the most advanced AI can come up with.
And this whole shift in how we see reality, it's really about going beyond that purely materialist perspective to one that acknowledges the role of consciousness, the power of our beliefs, and the incredible potential that we have as humans. And speaking of potential, the interview had this really interesting anecdote about how Maharishi Mahesh Yogi advised a young Deepak Chopra to study consciousness. And this advice led him to leave his successful medical career and follow his passion, which ultimately led to even greater things.
Yeah, it's a powerful example, like sometimes we need to look within and figure out what really resonates with us, what truly excites us, even if it means letting go of what we thought we should be doing. It's not about ignoring practical considerations completely, though. Like, they also talked about the example of not getting into medical school and how that led to finding a different path, which can be just as meaningful.
Right. And our mindset is so important. Having what they call an infinite mindset helps us to see and grab opportunities that we might otherwise miss. And even something like good luck, they reframe it as the point where opportunity and preparedness meet. Like, you have to have the right mindset and be ready when the opportunity shows up. And that's also connected to the idea of synchronicity. Those meaningful coincidences that happen sometimes.
But to really experience those synchronicities, to really tap into that intuition, the interview suggests that we need to go beyond our ego, to connect with something larger than ourselves, that mystery that some people call God or universal consciousness.
And they also talked about how everything is vibration. Our bodies, our thoughts, everything. And they said that the space between our thoughts, that brief pause, it's potentially like God's mind, a state of pure silence and presence, beyond time.
And that's where yoga comes in. A lot of people in the West just think of yoga as the physical postures, but there's so much more to it. The 8 limbs of yoga offer this whole path towards inner stillness and awareness. Those postures, the asanas, they were meant to be comfortable seats of awareness for meditation. And then there's breath control, that's pranayama, and all the different stages of meditation like dhyana, dharana, samadhi, they're all powerful tools for cultivating self-awareness and connecting with that stillness. They even suggested a little experiment you can try. Notice the stillness between a question and when you answer yes. That tiny pause can be an experience of pure presence.
That's cool. Okay, so we've covered a lot, but before we wrap up, they also touched on a couple other really big questions. Like, are we alone in the universe? And what about the multiverse?
Yeah, so that whole Fermi paradox thing, why haven't we found any aliens yet? It's a good question. But most astrobiologists today think that life probably exists all over the universe, even if we haven't found it yet. And it could be in forms we can't even imagine. I mean, this came up in conversations with experts like David Newman from MIT, and it's something that a lot of astrobiology departments are researching.
And then there's the multiverse. It's a really mind-bending concept. With that many worlds, interpretation of quantum mechanics, physicists like Sean Carroll suggest that there could be infinite parallel universes. Like, every possible outcome of every quantum event is playing out in a separate universe. But are these universes real? Or are they just, part of the imagination of the divine? That's a pretty big mystery to think about.
So we've explored some really profound and interconnected ideas today. We've shifted our perspective away from a purely material view of reality, and we've acknowledged the role of consciousness, the power of belief, and the incredible potential that each of us has.
And to you, our listener, the one who loves knowledge and those aha moments, we hope this deep dive has given you some new ways to think about your own potential and the nature of the reality we all share.
Perhaps the most thought-provoking idea to take away from all of this is this: that love, in its deepest form, could be the fundamental force that connects everything, that allows for communication beyond space and time, and even facilitates healing. Try exploring practices like meditation or mindfulness, anything that can help you cultivate that inner stillness. It could be the key to experiencing these concepts firsthand.
Yes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We really appreciate it.